to it are reason enough to oppose this legislation, and I urge opposition to it. And I'm going to reserve the balance of our time if the gentleman, chairman of the subcommittee, is not ready to close on the legislation.
I did tell the gentleman that I was prepared to close, but we do have one other speaker, and then I will close. He just came in, and we were not totally aware.
I'll reserve the balance of our time.
Okay. The gentleman from California reserves his time. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Then at this time, I would like to yield 5 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, who's a valuable member of the Energy and Commerce Committee and a chairman of one of our subcommittees.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 5 minutes. Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do apologize for my friend from California for coming late and kind of disrupting, you know, what was planned to be a closing. But this is an important debate, and my colleague from California and I have crossed sabers many times on these issues, and I don't question his commitment to the environment and the regs and rules and the like. But as he knows, I'm from Southern Illinois. I'm from an area that was devastated in the jobs issue and during the 1992 Clean Air Act. And I'm from an area of the country that still is not being all it can be based upon the excessive rules and regulations that come out of Washington, D.C. So the TRAIN Act is really a first start to help us ask a simple question. Shouldn't we, as an interagency process, shouldn't we at least ask the basic question of what is this going to do on the effect on jobs, and what is it going to do on the effect of our competitiveness worldwide? So it's really a basic debate. It's a good one to have. I applaud the chairman for bringing this to the floor. We need an up or down vote, because as much as we want clean air, we would like jobs. They're not exclusionary. We can do both. We have the cleanest environment that anyone has seen in decades in this country. And it's attributed to the work that past Congresses have done. But the difference is this, that in today's environment, well, let's go back. 3 decades ago, when you wanted to clean up 50% of the emissions, you could make the capital investments and you could do it. The debate now is how clean is clean, and what is the cost-benefit analysis, and what is the effect on jobs if we get to a limit that you don't find naturally. So what the TRAIN Act basically does is says, before we promulgate more rules, more regulations, we ought to at least admit the fact that it may affect our competitiveness in our economic position. We ought to accept the premise that if you continue to put more rules and regulations on electric generation, that electricity costs are going to go up. What does that do to the manufacturing sector? I think that's what this bill is just asking. If we find out these answers and we figure out that, you know, the cost, the economic costs outweigh the environmental benefit, well, maybe we better slow down. If we decide the environmental benefits are so great that we're willing to accept the cost, then we ought to move forward. But for us not to have this debate is not doing our job, and it's not doing our duty. So I'm really pleased that we brought this bill to the floor. We've had numerous hearings. We've gone through the legislative process. You know, I appreciate Speaker Boehner and the openness, because we've had hearings. We had a subcommittee mark. We've had a full committee mark. We've had this debate on amendments to this bill. And now we're ready to have this debate on the floor. The last, hearing we had in Chairman Whitfield's committee was on the reliability issue. And I took to task the chairman of the FERC, who in their own analysis said that if we continue to move on this regulatory regime, 80 gigawatts of power is going to go offline. Now, EPA did the analysis, and they said 8. So you got a tenfold difference. All right, well, maybe that they're both wrong. Maybe it's 40 gigawatts. My friends, 40 gigawatts is a lot of power and will affect the reliability of the electricity grid in this country. And we rely on that reliability for a lot of things. We rely upon it on the manufacturing sector and the manufacturing facility, but we also rely upon the reliability in the safety of our citizens who are in the hospitals and in long-term care who need power to those facilities just for their livelihood. So if our aggressive environmental movement takes away 80 gigawatts of power, will that affect our electricity reliability? I think it will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the time. And I
Time of the
yield back.
gentleman has expired. The gentleman from California has 1 minute remaining.
The EPA did an economic analysis looking at the costs and benefits, and on the cross-state air pollution rule, they said that the cost would be less than $1 billion, but the benefits would be up to $280 billion per year, 150 to 350 times its cost. But I want the chairman of the subcommittee to answer a question when he closes. I believe the Republicans have misrepresented this bill during the debate, but false information was put on their website tonight. They claimed hundreds of groups support the TRAIN Act, and immediately 2 groups came forward, and maybe others will as well, saying that they would never support the TRAIN Act, the Clean Water Action Committee, and the Clean Air Watch. I'd like to know if the information that is on the website is being checked for accuracy, because I notice a lot of things that have been said in this debate from the other side of the aisle have not been accurate. With that, I yield back the balance of my
The time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Kentucky.
I want to thank the gentleman for the debate today, and I was not aware that we had sent out a letter of supporters, and in that letter, supporters of this legislation, and evidently in that letter, there was a letter in opposition that should not have been in there, and if that created any hardship for anyone or problems, we certainly do apologize for that. We should remind ourselves that by every public health measure, from infant mortality to life expectancy, we are healthier today and exposed to fewer hazards than ever before. Our present-day air is much cleaner now than years ago, thanks to EPA, and our air quality is among the best in the world. And we recognize the importance of EPA. However, when EPA becomes so aggressive, as this EPA has become, and in a very short period of time, they've come forward with 14 regulations. And we know that when you look at cost-benefit analysis, different entities come up with different figures on the cost and the benefits. And we, for example, have come up with an analysis on the Utility Act and the air transport rule alone, saying that the annualized cost of that will be $17 billion, that industry will have to spend that kind of money to get new equipment. That the total cost between 2011 and 2030 would be like $184 billion. But one of the figures that really scares you in this is that they say there will be a net loss of like 1.4 million jobs. Now, we know that some jobs will be created in trying to build this equipment that these regulations are going to require. But most of the analysis that we've seen indicate that there's going to be more of a job loss. And so all the TRAIN Act is doing is that we're saying, let's have an independent government agency, including EPA, do an analysis of cost benefit of all of these rules. And we would also like them to look at what impact does it have on America's ability to be competitive in the global marketplace. We'd also like for them to look at what will be the job loss, net job loss. We'd also like for them to look on what impacts are going to have on electricity prices, as well as the reliability of electricity. And on 12 of those regulations, we do not stop them in any way. But on 2 of them, the ones that are most costly, Utility MACT and what I refer to as the Air Transport Rule, we do in this legislation delay the effective date of those, the implementation of those, until 6 months after the report is due that this legislation requires. Now, in my view, that's not being unreasonable. Some people think it is because it is the first time that Congress has ever come to the floor to question some of the EPA regulations. And I really think that that's our responsibility. They issue the regulations, but if they reach a point where we think they're being unreasonable, then we have an obligation to come and let's examine these. Let's look at them before we move totally forward with it. Now, Lisa Jackson, when she's come before us and testified, she's always made the comment that I'm creating jobs with these new regulations. And as I said earlier, she does create new jobs, but the net effect is there is a loss of jobs. Now, some of these rules may be great in areas like California and New York and the Northeast and elsewhere. But in the areas of the country where coal, and by the way, coal still provides 50% of all the electricity in America, and our electricity demand is going to increase significantly in the next 30 years, so we're going to have to rely on coal. But a lot of these regulations are going to put coal miners out of business because they're going to close some of these coal mines. It's going to put some coal-fired utilities out of business because they're going to close these utility plants because the cost is not going to be worth what they have to do to meet these air quality regulations. Now, on the air quality regulations, the question becomes, if you're 98% pure already, is it worth this much money to go 2% more? So that's the question we come down to, and that's why we ask for this analysis, and I would urge everyone to support this TRAIN Act legislation.
Gentleman, yield back.
Yield back the balance of my time.
All time has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the amendment in the nature of a substitute printed in the bill shall be considered as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule and shall be considered read. Gentleman from Kentucky rise.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee do now rise.
The question is on the motion that the committee do now rise. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the committee rises.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union, having had under consideration H.R. 2401, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that under the committee has had under consideration H.R. 2401 and has come to no resolution thereon. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the House will stand in recess subject to the call of the Chair.
The House is recessing, and as you just saw, members completed general debate on a measure that creates an 11-member committee to analyze EPA rules for effectiveness and their impact on businesses. More work on that EPA bill is expected tomorrow. But we do expect the House to come in later tonight to begin debate on another temporary federal spending bill for fiscal year 2012. Current government funding expires September 30th. Earlier today, Congressman David Dreyer and Jim McGovern came to the floor to debate what's called a same-day rule, which allows that a short-term federal spending bill to come to the floor. Here's a look at that debate.
Speaker, we are dealing with extraordinarily challenging times. The American people have been sending a message to us which is powerful and overwhelming, and it's one that I believe that both Democrats and Republicans have heard, and that is, we need to get our economy back on track. We need to make sure that we have a climate that will create jobs so that people, many of whom I represent, sadly, and I know the Speaker faces the same thing in the Show Me state of Missouri, and my friend in his state of Massachusetts faces this. We have friends and neighbors who have lost their jobs, who have lost their homes, who have lost their businesses. And the message that has come to us overwhelmingly is that we must put into place policies that will encourage job creation and economic growth. We obviously have a very troubled global economy. The developments that have taken place in Europe have played a big role in leading to today's huge drop in the stock market. I haven't looked at it in the last few minutes, but earlier today it was down over 400 points, and I know we have obviously difficult decisions that lie ahead for many. We, as an institution, the United States Congress, have a responsibility to address the fiscal needs and challenges that are before us. One of those challenges, and one of the factors that has played a role in the economic downturn, I believe very strongly, has been the $14.5 trillion national debt that looms before us. And again, as you know very well, Madam Speaker, in a bipartisan way, Democrats and Republicans alike decry the $14.5 trillion national debt that we have and the fact that we have deficits going as far as the eye can see. Now, we know that last July, just before we adjourned for the month of August, we had to deal with the question of whether or not we were going to increase the debt ceiling. And we tackled that issue, and we ended up coming to a bipartisan consensus. We all knew that it was necessary for us to increase the debt ceiling because there was a responsibility to pay the bills that had been accumulated in the past. From this side of the aisle, we complained and fought against the 82% increase in non-defense discretionary spending that we'd seen over the past 4 years. But with that money having been spent, we recognized that the bills had to be paid. And so that led us, Madam Speaker, to come to a bipartisan consensus that we would, in fact, increase the debt ceiling, but we had to tackle, in a bipartisan way, the deficit and debt issues that are looming before us. And so we put into place a joint select committee, which, as we all know, is going to be charged with, by November 23rd, completing its work, and by December 23rd, having a vote in the House and the Senate. And if they're not successful, we will deal with sequestration, which will be across-the-board spending cuts that I don't think anyone wants to see happen, because we want to be in a position where we make those decisions for a $1.5 trillion, and as many have said, a group of senators the other day said a $4 trillion, excuse me, $4 trillion, I was right, $4 trillion, excuse me. You know, the proverbial Everett Dirksen line, a billion here, a billion there. Before long, you're talking about real money, and that was 5 decades ago that he said that, and we are where we are now. So the plan, as proposed by some, Madam Speaker, would take us to as much as $4 trillion in spending cuts, and I hope we can do that in a bipartisan way. Now we are in a position where we, as I said yesterday during the debate on the rule on this issue, we last year, for the first time since the 1974 Budget Act was put into place, we didn't have a budget. that was proposed to us. Hey, I'm not in the business of pointing the finger of blame. I'm just in the business of looking at the facts of where we are. So we know what has been inherited. We know as we hear these very strong statements being made that we've gone through a difficult 9 months. We had to deal with a continuing resolution to simply clean up the mess, and the acting speaker is a member of the Appropriations Committee. She knows very well the challenges that we had without appropriations bills having been done last year. That Appropriations Committee on which the acting speaker sits has to deal with this issue, had to deal with it earlier this year, and today, Madam Speaker, we are in a similar position. We right now know that the fiscal year comes to an end next week, and we have some very important priorities that need to be addressed. And the one that everyone is talking about is the fact that we have seen disaster after disaster hit this nation, and we are determined to ensure that those who have suffered most over the past several weeks and months from disasters, flooding, and I remember seeing my colleague from Vermont, Mr. Welsh, here yesterday. He sent out photographs of the devastation of the flooding that's taken place in Vermont. In Pennsylvania, we just had a Republican conference at which one of our new colleagues, Mr. Marino, was up talking about the fact that he has been walking through mud, talking to families, parents who have their children literally sitting on automobiles because they can't get into their homes, asking what it is that they're going to do. We have our fellow Americans who are suffering, and we want to ensure that the dollars necessary for the Federal Emergency Management Agency are there. The chairman of the Appropriations Committee reported to us that we're seeing about $30 million a day being expended through the FEMA funding, and there's about 200 left. So we're faced with the prospect of expiration of all of the resources that FEMA needs by this weekend, Madam Speaker. And that's the reason that we are back here today. We all know what happened yesterday. The Democratic majority and some Republicans chose to vote no on the continuing resolution, which would simply take us from now to November 18th, a very short period of time, just a matter of a month and a half, so that during that time we can, as Speaker Boehner has said, deal with the overall appropriations process and establish the priorities. And so we are here today, having had a meeting in the Rules Committee last night calling for same-day consideration so that quite possibly with some modifications we can bring up that bill which had enjoyed bipartisan support. It's no secret. I'm sure the Democrats will acknowledge that the minority whip, Mr. Hoyer, the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Dix from Seattle, they both had indicated earlier support. They acknowledge it. They're on the record having done that. They said that they had changed their mind. And I respect that. Members have a right to change their mind. We all have a right to change our mind. But that decision was made, and we went to the vote, and the votes were not there. Madam Speaker, I think there is clearly a bipartisan understanding that ensuring that resources get to our fellow Americans who are suffering due to these disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, flooding, the disasters that have hit, is a priority that we all share. Personally, I'd like to see the federal government get out of being the place of first resort for the American people to look to when there is a time of disaster. In fact, the acting speaker's late husband, with whom I was elected in 1980, led an effort going back decades when he served here that was working on proposals for us to address the disaster relief issue that was a very, very challenging one, and he explored and came up with some great proposals for how we could deal with disasters beyond having the federal government be the place of first resort for the American people when they are faced with the aftermath of a disaster. But, Madam Speaker, those changes that were proposed by my late colleague Bill Emerson were not were not made in order, were not addressed, were not implemented, and so we are where we are. And while I'd love to see those changes down the road, today we need to address the very pressing needs that our fellow Americans have for some kind of resolution to this issue. And so we have this same-day rule so that we can today pass, with what I hope will be strong bipartisan support, a continuing resolution that will simply carry us from now to November 18th, during which time we will see, Madam Speaker, you and the other members of the Appropriations Committee work to come up with some kind of resolution to this issue. So I'm going to urge my colleagues to support this measure in the name of bipartisanship, in the name of our effort to try and resolve this pressing issue, and with that, reserve the balance of my time.
The balance of this time. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank the gentleman from California, Chairman Dreyer, for yielding me the customary 30 minutes. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks, and I yield myself such time as I may consent.
Without objection.
Here we go again, Madam Speaker. Republicans are once again going back on their promises for a more open, more transparent House of Representatives. Another martial law rule designed to fix problems of their own doing. Another effort to break the rules just to fix their own mess. And it didn't have to be this way. For months, we've known that more disaster assistance was needed to address the aftermath of the tragedy in Joplin, and more recently, the damage caused by Irene as it made its way from North Carolina up the East Coast into New England. Americans respond to natural disasters. That's what we do. We always have. We rise to the occasion when our neighbors are in need. The problem is when politicians start playing politics with people's lives. And that's where we find ourselves today. Yesterday, the Republican leadership brought a continuing resolution to the floor that not only provided less disaster assistance in the Senate, it also offset that funding by cutting a green jobs initiative. It's not enough that we've been in session 261 days without a single jobs proposal from the Republicans. With yesterday's continuing resolution, Republicans actually proposed cutting a jobs program just to make political points with their Tea Party base. Yesterday, Democrats said enough. Enough to the job-killing Republican agenda. Enough to the notion that fiscal austerity means turning our backs on people in need. Enough to the my way or the highway attitude that seems to make up the ideology of the Republican leadership. Yesterday, 48 Republicans joined 182 Democrats in defeating the continuing resolution yesterday. According to Politico, it was, and I quote, an embarrassing setback, end quote. Yesterday, Republicans and Democrats said, don't play games with the lives of Americans. It's almost as if the Republicans blame the victims of the hurricane and tornado for having the audacity to live in the paths of those natural disasters. And so here we are again, forced to consider a martial law rule in an attempt to fix the problems that the Republicans themselves created. A martial law rule that not only waives the rules of the House, but also allows for the immediate consideration of a new continuing resolution. No time to read the bill, even though the Republicans started out the year by promising 72 hours to look at any legislation voted on in the House. No time to read the bill. No ability to amend the bill. So much for the new open Congress. It wasn't too long ago that my colleagues on the Rules Committee were touting the new open Congress. Look how far this new Republican House has fallen. Madam Speaker, it is disappointing that we're here today. It's disappointing that the Republicans are making a mockery of the legislative process. It's disappointing that they continue to choose politics over the American people. The American people deserve better than this. With that, Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I might consume to say to my friend that it's very unfortunate. I mean, in my opening remarks, I made the best attempt that I could to be as bipartisan as possible. Democrats and Republicans alike recognize that we've had the most open House, most transparent process, more amendments debated in order. I'm very proud that the Rules Committee has repeatedly made McGovern amendments in order that have been proposed to the Rules Committee in the measure that we have addressing the regulation issue. We made every single amendment that complied with the rules of the House and order, an amendment offered by my friend Mr. Hastings. And so to talk about these sort of crocodile tears, Madam Speaker, the House has gotten to a new low. We need to make sure that the American people who are suffering and in need have the resources that are necessary. The measure that is before us has a higher level of funding for those who are in need than the President has proposed to ensure that we immediately get those dollars to the people who are suffering. And there are people all over this country who've been suffering through these disasters, and it needs to be done. And, Madam Speaker, I will say that we are where we are. The legislative process is not always a pretty one. But I began by talking about our priority of job creation and economic growth. Limiting the size and scope and reach of the federal government, trying to decrease the regulatory burden, which our TRAIN Act, which we just debated the rule on a little while ago, is designed to address. These sorts of steps are designed to make sure that more Americans will have opportunities to be members of the workforce, to be able to support their families, and so that people won't see their small businesses lost because of the economic downturn. Those are the priorities that we have, and getting our fiscal house in order while meeting our priorities, which in this day and age, disaster assistance is one of, are what we've got to do. And so I'm proud to work closely with my Democratic colleagues. I'm proud of the fact that they've been supportive, Madam Speaker, of a number of the measures that we've had before us, and I'm proud that we have been able to take many of their ideas, Madam Speaker, and allow them to be considered on the House floor so that we've been able to have a free-flowing debate. That's what the American people want. I believe that since every member of this House represents just about the same number of people, about 600 and some thousand under the new census, it'll be, I think, 704,000 constituents, that they have a right to be heard. They have a right to have their ideas considered. That hasn't always been the case under Republicans or Democrats in the past, but today it is. We're doing our doggonedest to make sure that more members have their ideas considered. And I'm very proud of that fact, and I will say that I regularly have Democrats come to me and say they are very appreciative of the fact that we have been able to allow their ideas to be considered on the House floor. And so I'm proud of the strides that we've been making under Speaker Boehner. We have a long way to go, but this is all inside baseball stuff, as you know very well, Madam Speaker. The priority is job creation and economic growth to ensure that our fellow Americans have the kinds of opportunities that they need. And so let us proceed. This is a procedure that I don't particularly like, but in light of the fact that there had been a bipartisan agreement yesterday that did not work out, that's about the nicest way that I can put it. It didn't work out. And so we had no choice other than to allow for a rule that would provide for same-day consideration simply of this measure to ensure that we don't go through a government shutdown. I mean, we wouldn't be doing a same-day rule, Madam Speaker, if we weren't faced with, frankly, the threat. I'm not going to point the finger of blame, but I will say it hasn't been Republicans who've been talking about the idea of a government shutdown. It's something that has come from some others, and some on the other side of the Capitol who have talked about the prospect of that. We want to avoid it. We want to ensure it doesn't happen. And so we're going to have an opportunity, Madam Speaker, to have a measure before us that will address the very important priorities of disaster assistance and other areas, which doesn't cut as much as I would like. I would love to have voted no yesterday, Madam Speaker, because I believe that the spending level is higher than it should be. But the Republicans do, in fact, have a majority in the House of Representatives. But our Democratic colleagues have a majority in the United States Senate. We know that President Obama is a Democrat, and in light of that, we have to come to some kind of bipartisan consensus. So we're turning ourselves inside out to make that happen, and we've done it time and time again, and this is another example of it. And so I hope that we'll be able to move ahead and as expeditiously as possible provide the assurance that our fellow Americans need. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I'm a little bit confused. The gentleman referred to the legislation before us that it would provide this for the American people and that for the American people. The legislation before us is a martial law rule, which says that a bill that we have yet to see will be able to be brought up on the floor for same-day consideration. So I don't know what's in the new continuing resolution, and maybe the gentleman can enlighten us. Do we expect a vote on the continuing resolution today? Do we expect to? When can we see this continuing resolution? Does the gentleman have any insight that he can fill us in on, and when members might actually be able to see it?
Will the gentleman yield?
I'll happy to yield.
First of all, let me express my apologies. 99.999% of the time, I am always riveted to the words of my friend from Worcester when he is offering his thoughts. I have to admit, I was talking to our distinguished Rules Committee colleague, Mr. Webster, right over here.
I'll reclaim my time and repeat the question.
The gentleman will repeat the question.
Yeah, the question is that the gentleman on a number of occasions referred to that this bill provides this for the American people and that for the American people. When the bill before us is a martial law rule, we haven't seen the continuing resolution. When do we expect to see it? Will we be voting on it today? I yield to the gentleman.
First of all, let me thank him and say that he is right on mark in raising that question. It's not only a fair question, it's an appropriate question to ask of me. The answer is we will have a meeting in the House Rules Committee right upstairs on the 3rd floor.
I'm familiar with it.
At which time, you're familiar with that spot, at which time we will have before us a proposal that I can tell you will be very similar to the measure that was considered yesterday. As we know, there was $1,043 billion in that proposal.
If I can reclaim my time, will that be in the next hour? Will that be today? Will that be tomorrow? Happy to yield.
It's my hope that we'll be able to do this today. That's the reason. I mean, as my friend knows, we were going to pass this measure yesterday, and it didn't work out. I mean, that's part of the legislative process.
Reclaiming my time.
I thank my friend for yielding.
The Rules Committee will consider it today, and then we'll vote on it tonight. Is that the plan?
The gentleman yield?
Yield to the gentleman.
I thank my friend for yielding. And, Madam Speaker, what I would say is that I hope the Rules Committee will be able to meet in the not-too-distant future. I can't say if it's now about 2.5 minutes before 4 o'clock. I can't say how quickly we'll be able to meet. We certainly, as is always the case, will give the minority ample notice for them to have a chance to look at whatever modifications are made to the continuing resolution that will be before us. And when
is that 1 hour or 72 hours?
Excuse me.
Will we give them 1 hour or 72 hours as was promised?
The gentleman yield?
Yes.
I have no idea what the gentleman's talking about. What is 72 hours? What is that?
My understanding was that one of the new pledges of the new Republican majority was that we're going to have 72-hour layover to be able to read the bill.
The gentleman yield?
Happy to.
Well, there was never any such pledge made. That's if the gentleman looks at the rules of the House, he knows very well that there's nothing in there that states 72 hours.
I thought the if I could reclaim my time, I thought in the rules of the House was 3 calendar days.
The gentleman yield?
I yield.
I thank my friend for yielding. And let me say that is true. As the gentleman knows very well, we're in a position right now where we're dealing with an emergency situation. The American people are hurting. We had the measure before us with a full 3 days. In fact, it was put into the record on Monday. Isn't that right? It was put on Monday. It was put online on Monday, and so we had the full 3 days. And it is true. We're looking at what would be possibly an amendment to that measure, and so we will be in compliance. First of all, again, let me say, Madam Speaker, that there was not any 72 hours in the rules of the House. If the gentleman will look at the rules of the House, it is a 3-day layover requirement, and I believe that we will be in full compliance.
I reclaim my time. If I'm understanding the gentleman correctly, we may or may not meet soon. We may or may not vote on it today.
Will the gentleman yield?
I'm happy to yield.
I thank my friend for yielding. Let me just say that obviously we had a bipartisan agreement that was voted on yesterday that did not enjoy bipartisan support. And I say that based on the fact that we had agreements made in colloquies that took place.
If I could reclaim my time, the gentleman mentioned our distinguished minority whip on a number of occasions. I don't recall him ever saying that he supported the Republican bill. Yes.
The gentleman yield. Well, let me specifically say that Mr. Dix, the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, indicated before the gentleman and the other Rules Committee members and me that he would be supportive of the measure, and he said he had a right to change his mind. Second, in the colloquy that took place last week between the distinguished minority whip and the majority leader, the minority whip indicated that he was supportive of the continuing resolution.
If I reclaim my time, I don't recall that, and I'll check with the minority whip to double check on that. I guess I'm trying to provide some information to members of the House who are watching this going on. Am I correct in saying that as of right now, we don't know when we're going to meet, and we don't know when we will see the final version of the continuing resolution?
Would the gentleman yield? I thank my friend for yielding. And Madam Speaker, let me say that first, to address the issue that was raised earlier, there was confusion. I don't know what the gentleman meant about 72 hours. There is a 3-day layover requirement. We will not, and let me underscore again, Madam Speaker, we will not be waiving the 3-day layover requirement. Okay, so I just think it's important for us to make that. The gentleman repeatedly raises 72 hours, and we're not in compliance with this and that. But when, in fact, Madam Speaker, we will not be waiving. It's a 3-day layover requirement that exists. We will not be waiving that. Second, as far as what time, I believe that within the next few hours, we will be able to meet in the Rules Committee and come to the House floor. There are no guarantees.
Okay.
There are no guarantees, but I believe that there is a very good chance that we will be able to, in the next few hours, meet in the Rules Committee, and the gentleman and I will come to the floor with a rule that will allow us to make an order, the continuing resolution, to ensure that our fellow Americans who are suffering so will have the resources
I reclaim my time.
And I thank my friend for yielding.
And if I could ask the gentleman one additional question, does he anticipate that the Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Loan Program will be cut in the new version of the continuing resolution that we brought before us?
Would the gentleman yield?
I yield to the gentleman.
Madam Speaker, I thank my friend for yielding. And let me say that at this juncture, I cannot tell my friend exactly what this measure is going to consist of, but we're in a position right now where that will be considered by the Committee on Rules when we do meet upstairs. And so we'll be meeting upstairs, and we'll see if that might be an amendment. I thank my friend for yielding, Madam Speaker.
And Madam Speaker, just for the record, I'd like to have inserted a letter from Paul A. Yost, who's the Vice President at the National Association of Manufacturers, and a letter from R. Bruce Johnston, who is the Executive Vice President of Government Affairs of the Chamber of Commerce of the United States, both strongly objecting to the offset that the Republicans included in the continuing resolution that we considered yesterday and that went down. And one of the reasons why there was great objection over this, Madam Speaker, was because this program that was cut actually is a job-creating program, putting people to work. And I would say to my colleagues, if you want to reduce the debt in this country, you ought to figure out a way to put people back to work. And the way you put people back to work is not cut every single program that provides assistance to business and to people to be able to get on their feet and create jobs. We have a crisis in this country that is not being addressed by this House of Representatives, which has yet to consider a single jobs bill. And instead, we have a continuing resolution that gets brought to the floor that provides less disaster assistance than the Senate bill does to people who are in need, and pays for it, offsets it by cutting a program to create jobs. What sense does that make? You know, when it comes to disaster relief, we have never, ever, ever offset disaster relief because you can't predict with any accuracy whether there's going to be a tornado next year or a hurricane next year or an earthquake next year. There are some things we don't offset, we should offset. For example, the wars. You know, we've been in Afghanistan for 10 years. I can't figure out why we're still there, but we're still there. 10 years. I can predict pretty much with very accurately how much it would cost to stay another year. And yet, we borrow that money. We put it on the credit card. We borrow $10 billion a month for military operations in Afghanistan that goes onto our credit card. Not paid for. Not paid for. But when it comes to helping people in this country who have been adversely impacted by a natural disaster, through no fault of their own, who have lost their homes, who have seen their communities devastated, all of a sudden we're here saying we've got to find these offsets. And where do the offsets come from? They don't come from Donald Trump's tax cut. You know, what they come from is a program to put people to work. And the gentleman, you know, the chairman of the Rules Committee talks about this great openness that we have in the Rules Committee. I have offered, I think, about a half a dozen times an amendment to go after the U.S. taxpayer-funded oil subsidies, these subsidies that we provide oil companies that are making record profits. And we can't even get that issue for a vote on this House floor. So, look, I hope that, you know, we'll see. I hope we have enough time to read what's in the bill. I hope we have enough time to understand what's in the bill. I hope that, you know, that we meet today. I hope that we meet at a decent hour. But we don't have the answers to any of those questions. And I think that that's unfortunate when it comes to a bill about the funding, the continuing funding of our government. Again, Madam Speaker, I regret that we are here. I regret that we are debating a martial law rule. We're not debating a continuing resolution right now. It's a martial law rule that basically shuts everything down and allows them to bring up a bill anytime they want to bring a bill up. People don't have enough time, won't even have time to read it. And we will have that vote possibly today. But again, we don't have any definite commitments from the other side as to what time or even if it will be today. I'll close by saying, Madam Speaker, that I think it is important that this House get back to the issue of jobs and about protecting and caring for the people here in this country. And our biggest challenges, I'm going to tell my friends on the other side, are not halfway around the world. Some of them are just halfway down the block. And I regret very much that this Congress has yet to deal with the issue of jobs. And at this time, I'd like to reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I might consume. And let me say, Madam Speaker, to my very good friend that jobs and job creation are exactly what virtually every piece of legislation that we have been addressing in this House have been designed to deal with. Now, my friends on the other side of the aisle believed that the nearly $1 trillion, it was like 787, I think, billion dollar, and then if you add the interest, it came up to like 1.1 trillion. They said that stimulus bill was their jobs bill. And as I recall, we were told that if we saw that trillion-dollar stimulus bill implemented, that the unemployment rate would not exceed 8%. Well, Madam Speaker, in part of the area that I represent, we have an unemployment rate of 14%. We have a national unemployment rate of over 9%, and it's not acceptable. And so I totally concur with my friend's assessment, and I congratulate him. I congratulate him for his opening statement there when he said the best way for us to deal with the deficit is to make sure that people in this country have jobs. Economic growth is what we have been talking about. I believe that if we had 2, 3, 4% more GDP growth in this country, we wouldn't be here having this discussion. The question is, how is it that we get our fellow Americans back to work? We believe that it's essential to create long-term, good jobs in the private sector. We believe that doing things like opening up new markets around the world, when 96% of the world's consumers are outside of our borders, 96% of the world's consumers outside of our borders, and yet, unfortunately, we have not been able to have yet the agreements that have been negotiated over the past several years sent to us in the Congress to vote on. And clearly, if we had the agreements that have been negotiated between the Koreans of the United States, the Colombians of the United States, the Panamanians of the United States. We would create many, many jobs here in the United States. Yesterday, Madam Speaker, I met with the ambassador from Colombia, and on August 15th, they implemented an agreement with Canada for free trade agreement between Canada and Colombia. And guess what? There has been an 18.9% increase in wheat exports from Canada to Colombia in one single month. Now, Madam Speaker, I've said this time and time again here. We have union and non-union workers who are employed by companies, great American companies that are manufacturing companies like Caterpillar, John Deere, Whirlpool. And we could get these people working. We could get these people working if we could open up new markets for those manufactured products in Latin America, in Asia. And that's exactly what we've got ahead of us. And I hope very much that the President will immediately send to us those agreements so that we can enjoy, and again, bipartisan support, Democrats and Republicans working together to pass these agreements. If we do that, we'll do exactly what my friend just said, Madam Speaker. We'll do exactly what my friend just said in his opening statement there. And what he said was, we need to get Americans into jobs so that we can have the revenues that are necessary for us to deal with the deficit and debt challenges that we have. I'm happy to yield to my friend.
I thank the gentleman for yielding to me, and I just found out some news here in answer to a question I had earlier about offsets. Apparently, according to National Journal, that Republican leaders are considering tacking on as much as $100 million in additional offsets to their GOP continuing resolution they're bringing to the floor, and that was that's a quote attributed to House Rules Committee Chairman David Dreyer. So I just read on the National Journal basically that there'll be additional offsets to the ones that.
If I could reclaim my time, Madam Speaker, let me say that I hope very much that we are able to see offsets for this, because again, we have a $14.5 trillion national debt.
Right.
We have deficits as far as the eye can see. And so as we deal with the very important priorities of ensuring that our fellow Americans who are suffering because of these tragic disasters that have taken place across the country, we need to realize that there is a hell of a lot of waste in the federal government. A hell of a lot of waste. And there are regulations. Again, the measure that I just mentioned, my friend said that we haven't had jobs bills before us, but the measure that we just, Mr. Hastings was just managing the rule on, is designed to deal with a burden of regulations which has undermined the potential for job creation and economic growth. And again, pursuing an economic growth agenda is a priority of ours, and making sure that we get our fiscal house in order is one of those. And so that's why I will say to my friend in response to his question, you bet we're going to try and find areas where the federal government has been expending dollars that have not been spent wisely, and use those dollars to ensure that those who are suffering and those who are in need have what is necessary for them to survive. My friend would like me to further yield?
I appreciate it.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to further yield to the gentleman from Worcester.
Which kind of brings me back to my original point, is why it's important for us to see this bill. Now, you say that you want to eliminate waste, but the U.S. Chamber of Commerce says that the Advanced Vehicle Technology Manufacturing Program is not waste, it creates jobs. So I don't know where else you're going to cut.
Madam Speaker, if I could reclaim my time,
Madam
Speaker. May I reclaim my time, Madam Speaker? Let me say to my friend, we are not going to waive the 3-day layover requirement, and whatever changes are made in this measure will be addressed in the House Rules Committee and then fully debated on this House floor, so that members will have an opportunity to decide whether or not they are going to support the special rule that would then make an order consideration of this continuing resolution that will prevent a government shutdown, make sure that the resources for those who are suffering are made available, and take us to November 18th so that very thoughtful members of the Appropriations Committee, like the acting Speaker, will be able to deal with the appropriations priorities that we need to between now and November 18th. And so with that, Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, I just want to make sure the record is clear when it comes to Democratic support for the continuing resolution. In his pen and pad press conference, Minority Whip Hoyer said he was, and I quote, loath to support yesterday's CR. And I have a copy of that press conference and the transcript of the colloquy that was that went on the House floor here. So I'm going to, if anybody is interested in reading it in detail, I have it here. At this point, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings.
I thank my colleague on the Rules Committee and my good friend for yielding, and I echo all of the sentiments that he has made previously. Firstly, I'd like to point to the fact that the National Association of Manufacturers, in their last sentence in a letter directed to Senator Reid and Senator Mitch McConnell, he says, during this time of economic recovery, we urge you to preserve this successful program, meaning the Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Program, that is helping preserve auto sector jobs and make promise energy security. Bruce Johnston from the Chamber of Commerce also citing to all members of the House of Representatives that the Chamber understands the importance of reducing America's unacceptable debt and believes that all programs must be on the table. The Chamber urges you to bear in mind the facts that the ATVM loan program, which promotes manufacturing in the United States, is an important component of America's energy security. I only cite to that for the reason that there could be no better person to know what martial law is than the distinguished chairman of the Rules Committee, who is my good friend. He and Mr. McGovern and I, Ms. Slaughter and he and I, have been back and forth on martial law when Democrats were in charge and when Republicans were in charge. And one thing you need to understand is this is martial law that you are bringing this rule under, and we don't even know what's in the bill. Yesterday afternoon, the Republican leadership brought up a bill that failed American workers, failed our nation's economy, and failed those struggling to recover from natural disasters. It's no surprise that their rank and file then failed them. Rather than take up language that has already passed the Senate with bipartisan support, Republicans instead chose to pit unemployed factory workers against hurricane victims. This is not the kind of behavior that will bring our nation out of this recession. While Republicans continue their partisan squabbles, countless Americans are fighting for their livelihoods. 6 years after Hurricane Katrina, roofs are still being replaced, homes are being repaired, and paperwork is still pending for funds that have yet to be allocated. And if you've been to New Orleans, you'll see a whole section of that city that is not in repair. In my home state of Florida, FEMA has already delayed $1.68 million for work resulting from 04 and 05 Hurricanes Charlie, Francis, Ivan, Jean, and Dennis. Given my colleagues' distorted priorities, I can't help but wonder how long will the people of New England have to wait, since we've been waiting in Florida since 04 and 05, and some have been waiting for drought relief and flood relief
1 minute.
For an equal number of years. But this appears to be of no consequence to my Republican colleagues, as they fail to recognize that their ideological posturing has very real repercussions. Once again, their irresponsible behavior and unwillingness to compromise has put us on the brink of yet another shutdown. HRES 409 unnecessarily would provide for same-day consideration of another Republican continuing resolution, violating the House Republicans' rules package passed in January, which provided that all bills will be available to the public 3 days before coming to a vote. Not only did we not get the required 72 hours, we didn't get 24 hours. The Speaker made it very clear. he said, we will dispense with the conventional wisdom that bigger bills are always better, that fast legislation is good legislating, that allowing additional amendments and open debate makes the legislative process less efficient than our forefathers intended. Legislators and the public will have 3 days to read bills before they come to a vote. I must be in... 30 seconds is
30
satisfactory.
seconds. I yield initial 30 seconds.
We were told we would have 3 days to read bills before they come to a vote. We were told that they would be on the Internet and that technology is available so all of America could see what we are doing. And as the Speaker said, and I thoroughly agree, fast legislating is not good legislating, especially when there's no need to require a rush closed process. As far as we know, we're voting on the same-day rule for a bill we don't even know exists. Before we even ask to spend billions of dollars, we should have some idea of what's going on. And it's not enough for me to hear that we're going to hear about it in the Rules Committee later on. I want to know